Welcome back, everyone, to the Untangling Conspiracies podcast, where we try to evaluate how likely it is that a conspiracy theory really happened. Today, we're taking a look at the phantom cosmonaut theory, the idea that during the space race, the Soviet Union actually had cosmonauts in space before Yuri Gagarin, except these cosmonauts did not return to Earth alive. Is this a dark truth behind one of humanity's greatest expeditions, or simply some Western propaganda? And actually, how suspicious was the Soviet space program? Join us today to find out. And before we get into it, please follow and like our podcast to stay notified for our future episodes. So, before we get into this out-of-the-world topic that we have lined up for today, I'm very excited about this topic because I will say, I'll preface this by saying I didn't want to do this episode right away, because this is the conspiracy theory I believe in the most, if you had to point me towards one. So, this should be a great episode for today. And for a great episode, we're joined with some great guests and co-hosts. So, making a new, fresh appearance in this podcast series is Ryan. Ryan, say hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan.
Yeah, and what have you been up to lately, Ryan? How's your life been?
Oh, my life's been going. Still doing my master's, getting through that. Yeah, just living life. Nothing too crazy, honestly. Just going through school, going through it, and hopefully I can finish on time.
Don't worry, but I think both Han and I, when we did our masters, were pretty delayed. And speaking about Han, let's switch. Let's hear from him.
Greetings. Yeah. So you say when we did our masters, that's kind of not the case. I'm still doing my master's, technically. I'm not graduated. I'm just doing something else, which is working for an internship, which is also fun. But yeah, I do sometimes forget that I'm still a student, technically.
And I guess I'm Simon. I've finished my master's, unlike both of you. So, and I've been recently working, which is why I have all this free time to do podcasts.
Can't see the eye rolls right now.
Very true, very true. How are we feeling? I don't know how it's in Canada right now, Ryan, but for Han and I, we're being threatened by some new COVID lockdowns. How are you feeling about this, Han?
Well, we're not really being threatened as much as we're already in one, so it's just a matter of how long is it going to take. I don't know. It's just something to deal with, honestly. As they promised it was going to be 3 weeks, but then again, they promised that the other one was going to be 2 weeks, and then it lasted 4 months. So, yeah, just live with it.
Yeah, I'm very glad I'm not in the Netherlands anymore, because now I can just say the Dutch are extremely incompetent with their COVID stuff.
Oh, you...
You can't even protest it that hard. They're the first European country to reimpose lockdown measures. But whatever, that's getting away from the main topic.
Maybe we're just being ahead of the curve. Who knows? The Belgians, though. Oh, terrible.
Oh no.
They're announcing new measures tonight, or they should have an hour ago. And I'm not checking the internet because I don't want to work from home anymore. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, talking about not really working from home or not really being home, our conspiracy kind of ties into this. And the way we're going to run through it, just to present the format so you guys know it, is firstly, I'll do a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the theory. Then we're all going to give our initial agreement, disagreement, how much we believe in it on a 1 to 10 scale. And then I'm going to run you through 3 pieces of evidence or 3 historical things that should change your mind. And then we'll see if our minds have been switched, if you all sit with my peak of believing this theory. And fun fact, I didn't even tell Ryan the topic of this before coming in today. So you're going to be our genuine litmus test here, Ryan.
Yeah, just going in blind. We'll see what crazy stuff you have to say.
Yeah. And to kick this off, I guess, Ryan, I want to ask you, what would be the scariest way to die?
So I have, oddly enough, despite formerly being a swimmer, I have a very intense fear of open ocean, and I'd say for me the most panic-inducing death would be drowning in the open ocean. I would not like that.
That's called thalassophobia, I think. A friend of mine
yes,
has that too.
It is.
To a degree that he was actually uncomfortable looking at a map of an island.
Ooh, okay. I don't have it
Yeah.
that bad, but I even have it like in lakes. I like tubing, like behind like
Yeah.
a speedboat. Like I love tubing, but as soon as I fall into the water, I like freeze up a little bit. I gotta calm myself down, and it's just such a strange feeling because I'm a really good swimmer, but then get into those situations where I'm just like,
Yeah,
oh
you
God.
were a lifeguard actually, weren't you?
Yeah, but not at like a beach or anything. At a
But I was going
pool.
to say, a lifeguard with the fear of water isn't very confidence
Well, he's
inducing.
not afraid.
It's
He's not
not
afraid of
fear
water.
It's not
I
water.
know, it's open water, I guess, but
Yeah.
just
So
trying to
I
make a
would
good
say that classic kind of like mobster way of killing someone, like sleeping with the fishes, concrete shoes.
Oh yeah.
I'm terrified of that. That's yeah.
What about
That'd
you,
be-
Han? Because I can make an excellent segue off what Ryan said, but I want to see if you can give
Ooh.
some differing thoughts.
Oh well, I mean, mine's just really, really grim and dark. I don't want to die of dementia.
That's so practical of you to say. So
I
Dutch.
don't know. I recently watched a movie called The Father with Anthony Hopkins. I think he got an Academy Award for it as well, which is just about this man that having dementia, and it's just terrifying. Honestly, I'd rather drown. I'd rather drown, much rather.
Our theory today relates a bit more to, I guess, the drowning, but instead of drowning, you're drowning in a vacuum of space.
Okay.
Have you heard, Ryan, of the dead or phantom cosmonaut theory?
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this. I think if it's what I'm thinking of, like the US, like Yuri Gagarin is the first man to come back from space, not the first man in space.
Exactly. That's a great summary. I think that's exactly what I might have told you once at a drunken party or something. But
No? Okay.
we'll see. But regardless, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Whether or not the USSR has ever killed people going into space, or if there's been unconfirmed cosmonauts who died in space or on cosmonaut missions. And this is a really juicy one because, as you see, I have some really nice evidence points lined up for us today. But before we get into this, I want to get your guys' on a scale from 1 to 10. 1, completely don't believe it. 10, completely on board. Where do you sit with this? Han, start us off.
I'm just gonna go out and straight up slap an 8 out of 10 out on this. I think this is very plausible, and I don't know if you guys have seen or heard of this, but there is actually a recording, or at least I don't know.
We'll
if
get
it's
into
a
that.
recording. It's the recording. Okay. I don't know if I'm gonna spoil anything. I'll just wait. You can go.
Yeah. Ryan, what do you think?
I'm just gonna slap a big old 10 on it. Like
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
based on what I know of this theory and just the general history of the USSR, this like it seems absolutely true to me.
But we're talking about U.S. Are we talking about any person or just Russian people?
Specifically Russia for this one, because otherwise it's going to get a bit too grand for my eyes.
Because I wouldn't be surprised if an American was lost in space at some point as well.
Same. I feel like a lot of countries have a lot to hide in that regard.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe not a lot of countries, but the big two.
Yeah, the thing is, there's just so much more the nature of how the USSR worked, and we'll talk a little bit about this. It makes it so much easier to find incidents where this could have happened. And yeah, to like kind of get off the fence myself a little too, I kind of think this is a 10 out of 10 as well. So I like I said, I really do think this is one that has a lot of merit behind it.
Well, that's
and
it,
I hope
guys.
this is.
We're convinced. We can
Yes, go ahead.
End it.
Nah, but my goal here, Han, is to make you a 10 out of 10 as well. So,
That's not enough.
Han, your goal could be to demote Ryan to a 9 out of 10 or something.
Oh, okay. I mean, do you have any counterpoints? Counter
I have
We'll
counterpoints
see.
if you need some. So,
We'll
but
see.
Okay, well,
See?
that's good. I want to hear both sides of this.
I'll maybe lean a bit more to the skeptical side as we like approach the end of my points, just to kind of provide some tension within your minds.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get started. And I want to kind of begin, and my first major point exploring this theory is looking on why people go to space, or why there would be a motive to put a man into space first, or why this would be a motive that they would want to pursue to the extent of killing people. So a really quick outline of the major milestones kind of the Soviet space program, or the major milestones of note, is that October 4th, 1957, as we all know, dear date in our hearts, Sputnik 1 became the first satellite in space, much to the surprise of everyone. Now, funnily enough, the Russians barely announced this. They were like, a few days later, they were like, oh, right, we also launched something into orbit. And surprisingly...
It's no big deal.
Yeah, they literally thought like that. But then the Western media made a huge deal about it. And they were like, this could be exploited for some propaganda purposes. So then they actively began really pumping up their space program stuff. And it didn't hurt that a lot of Western media was really roasting the US for not being in the same position as the USSR was to launch a satellite into space. And thus kicked off the glorious space race as we know it. I know all of us, I guess, are more of like an international relations background, but do you guys kind of know like the real purpose behind conducting like space tests or the space race?
I get like the real reasons. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, prime among them, I'm assuming what you're leaning to is just kind of geopolitical maneuvering. I mean, satellite imagery, once that started becoming a thing, I mean, that's a huge leg up. You need to understand what your enemy's capable of. You need to see what kind of like nuclear stockpiles they have. Then luckily, or as far as we know, this never happened, but, potentially putting a nuke in space. That was, I'm sure, on a lot of people's minds.
I actually watched a video about what would happen with a nuke in space, which is not the same as you'd think, but... How about a nuclear base on the moon? I mean, that be neat. Maybe there is one on the dark side of the moon.
Oh, that's
Transformers on the dark side of the moon.
There is Transformers on the dark side of the moon.
But you're close though, Ryan, and kind of hitting the nail on the head. The real reason was not really about getting stuff really into space per se, but more demonstrating that we had rockets which could go the distance to get something into space and further. Because the big rage was loading a nuclear warhead onto a rocket, creating an ICBM, and launching that at your rival from your own country.
Yes.
So when the space race started, the fact that the Soviet Union could launch a satellite into space was impressive to the average layperson, but it was like breathtakingly scary to the average American strategic thinker, because it means that if you can launch something into space, you can also launch a nuke at Washington, basically, from any angle.
Yes. And it proved... or maybe not proved, but as a way of saying our Nazi scientists are better than your Nazi scientists.
Yes, yes. A lot of that Operation Paperclip stuff coming in there. But
yes.
We'll leave that for later. So getting a man into space isn't per se really the big issue here, which is kind of, I think, why the Americans didn't focus on it that heavily during the initial days. As we all know, allegedly, Yuri Gagarin, became the first man to space. He was Soviet in 1961. And America kind of was struggling to play catch up. But eventually their rocket power just seemed to be better than what the Russians were producing. Regardless, the Russians did have a habit of, sending stuff up into space and, just kind of leaving it there. 1957, November the 3rd, Laika, the beautiful dog she was launched to space. And rip to her doggy soul, I guess we could say.
Or doggy.
So, interesting enough, how big is a dog, right? A dog's like an animal, right? And Laika was a pretty sizable dog.
What kind of dog was Laika, actually? We're talking a Pomeranian or a Golden Retriever? Okay.
Some kind of dog. I'm not a dog enthusiast.
Some kind of dog.
But like an average dog size, I guess. But the thing, though, is if they can launch a dog into a space, a dog and a human aren't like tremendously different in proportional sizes, right?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I guess.
I get it.
A small person.
Yeah,
general
so
profile.
If a rocket could launch a dog into space, it's not the same to assume that you could launch a rocket with a human in it instead.
No, for sure.
So basically, from 1957 to 1960 was the first date they actually returned animals alive, and they did like 16 or 17 tests of dogs up there. So there were quite a few that really didn't had a pretty warm time upon re-entry, I guess is how to put it lightly.
No.
Well, I mean, if they even went for re-entry, right?
Yeah.
They haven't got to that point.
Yeah, but I will say,
was a husky, so maybe she wasn't too cold up there.
Yeah, but still, I would like to give my respects to her. She great progress for people kind in general. But yeah, regardless, the motive I kind of just want to say is that making better rockets and keeping the space race going was of prime strategic importance for the Russians, and the popularity boost it had of launching stuff into space, being the first to do stuff, was really big as well. And the other thing about the Russian program, which I think kind of relates to the motive, was kind of the secrecy and ineptitude of the USSR government in general, and how they kind of use that secrecy to their advantage. So the Russians never really officially admitted to having an unsuccessful rocket launch, despite many of them kind of exploding early or breaking early, just because they didn't really announce when they were launching rockets. Any rocket that launched and exploded in space tended to be a rocket that was designed to explode in space, or was designed to blow up something like that. And you can kind of do it with the secrecy they had around.
It's the all according to the plan argument.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But coupling that together, I mean, they had rockets which could launch dogs into space. They had some kind of motive. They had, the willingness to lie and cover things up. I mean, A plus B plus C equals dead cosmonaut? Buying this argument? Is this solidifying your stance there, Han?
Well, I mean, maybe. Like I said, I think it's pretty plausible already that they would send a guy into space. I mean, they had gulags. They had plenty of disposable people that were being, unceremoniously taken out without a trial. So why not just stick one in a rocket and see how it goes?
I will say the cosmonauts tend to be highly trained, despite the fact they just sat in a rocket and were shot up. I was reading some stuff earlier, and it was actually considered by Russian test pilots. Some of them were skeptical to become a cosmonaut because it was less glorious, because you had no control over the aircraft itself. You were basically just a passenger.
Mm-hmm. This makes sense. Yeah. Which is why why would you train? What would you train them for if you're just sending them into space to see if they remotely survive or how they come back?
Well, I'll get it. There's one example I want to touch upon later, but sometimes you do have to orient it and maybe steer it a little. But I guess I'm sure there's a lot of stuff, and yeah, I don't want to degrade their profession and sacrifices.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if anything, the Soviet Union has proved it's more than willing to kill even completely capable and intelligent people.
Exactly, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess I kind of want to use that point. It's a bit of it's a warming up point, getting the motive there, a bit of background historical context to what the Soviet Union was up to in this point of time. And I want to move now to the timeline that we're looking at. So what I think is important is to identify the potential dates that could have been launches which contained men or women which were destroyed, or unsuccessful manned launches. And I have a few pretty nice scenarios which happened before Yuri Gagarin ever allegedly, quotation marks, did his flight. So I want to start off the timeline by kind of pointing out again, 1957 was when Sputnik 1 was launched. By 1958, some American and Western officials were claiming that the Russians were projected to be able to launch men into space within a year or so. And that was pretty credibly believed and within the technological capabilities. I mean, they did do it by 1961. So the prime era we're looking at is from 1960 to 1961. Also adding to the importance of this era is that Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, at several times, I'll point him out, actually made speeches saying that he was going to launch a man into space during that time, which were allegedly unfulfilled upon. So we'll get into it. So the first date I want to structure ourselves around would be May 15th, 1960, when the USSR launched a 5-ton spaceship/satellite, which was the biggest at the time, and it included a dummy pilot on board. So this was basically like a dummy or like a doll kind of thing, which is life-sized.
Yeah.
Exactly. Human-sized. It was dressed up in a spacesuit, everything like that. And, supposed to be a good space flight for it. Went up in space. I think this was about a 5-day kind of mission. The steering system, kind of booster system, kind of failed. It went off orbit and completely, I think, blew up, crashed, broke, whatever. But Yes, as designed, as Ryan was saying. But if you have a dummy pilot, couldn't that just have been a real human? And couldn't the fact that it blew up in space not just have been the Russians saying it was a dummy pilot because the mission failed? Because it would look a lot worse to be the first nation to kill someone in space. How credible do you think this instance is?
I mean, I think to be fair, you would, in the process of trying to get a human into space, you would do a dummy test at some point.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of like feeding into the whole propaganda of like the Soviet Union will just throw people into the meat grinder as they do.
Well, they kind of did.
Oh no!
5 minutes ago, you were saying that, Ryan. 5 minutes ago.
I know, but like so at some point, it does get cartoonish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they weren't exactly. They weren't cartoonish evil. They were at least pragmatic in some sense. They wouldn't want to just throw away human life without any potential benefit. So.
Mm-hmm. And this is also the post-Stalin era where the true meat grinderness subsided, at least compared to.
I mean, subside is a relative term considering what was his body count? Something like 50 million. Regardless,
Khrushchev.
That's a whole nother.
Yeah. Regardless, we'll move on to the next day because I do kind of agree this is a bit more of like a niche situation, but I do think it could have been a cover. Could have happened. It could have. I think standalone, this could have been a nice little one-off conspiracy. But the fact there's more, kind of adds to it. So the next big day I want to turn ourselves to would be September to October 1961. So during this time, Khrushchev actually went to New York and visited the UN. While he was abroad, the Soviet Union released a statement which told people, in regards to space stuff, keep your eye on September 27th. ... And Khrushchev made a really big deal about, we're going to be first state to have a man into space, a first man flight, everything. So everything was aligning perfect kind of media storm for September 27th was going to be the day it's going to happen. However, September 27th came and went. Nothing really seemed to happen. There were no announcements made by the USSR. Now, Khrushchev is still in America. He actually extends his stay until October the 13th. What we know about this period of time is that there were 2 rockets launched in the USSR while he was in the USA. On the first one on October the 10th, and the second one on October the 14th, I believe. So it could have been he was just trying to stick around in America when this happened so he could just parade around and be like, oh, look at what we did. However, these 2 rockets were, I think, some of the largest rockets the USSR had launched up until that time, and were 2 new rocket types, so new kind of rocket things. And both failed early in their launches. They kind of exploded, I think, some booster components. Tricky stuff. I would know I'm a rocket scientist, of course. So the theory is these could have been manned. They were huge rockets. They were going up into space. They correspond to the time that Khrushchev was making these big claims, and he was in a really good place to get a lot of media spotlight. I mean, being at the UN, being in New York, while you put a man into space, that just looks great. And then going home a few days later and then having the parades there. Seems like a great plan. Any issues with that?
Well, I mean, you did mention that the previous rocket with the crash test dummy, let's assume that was a crash test dummy and it explodes. Would the logical next step be to put a guy in the next rocket?
Yeah, not really.
Nah,
I mean, there were rocket launches in between as well. I just picked the ones which correspond, I think, to the best situations. And this was a different type of rocket as well.
Right.
If you do recall, I believe either Vostok 1, which is the one we believe succeeded, was the first one of the Vostok missions. So they are adept at just throwing stuff up.
Yeah. Okay, so while I still believe in the theory overall, I think like there's definitely a lot of speculation when we go into like each individual launch, because it just could have just been a failed unmanned rocket launch. He could still have made a big deal about like, look, these massive rockets we've sent up in the air. I mean, Khrushchev was a very colorful character, to say the least. So, and pretty fitting that these rockets blow up when he's in the UN in New York.
It's pretty fitting, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's on par with just him as a person. But yeah, I think it is hard to prove anything with this, just because of how notorious Soviet record keeping is, and both its thoroughness and its propensity to lie. So it's just really hard, like to make like a definite statement, like, oh yeah, like there's definitely a guy on board. Because I can imagine it both ways. Like, yeah, like that would be amazing propaganda. That like, oh, day I come into the UN, look, we got a dude in space. But you could also just be like, oh yeah, like look, we got a massive rocket in space. It
never gets old, man.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
There's just something. Can we just say that there's something deeply satisfying about sending a giant phallic-shaped object into space? I mean, everyone's doing it.
Well, you said it, Han, not me.
Well, so. I mean, just ask Jeff Bezos. just ask all the billionaires. Once you've got the money, it is just irresistible to send a giant object that is very long into space. All right, I'll quit.
Do you know what surprises me? The Virgin Galactic guy, Richard Branson, has the least phallic-shaped spacecraft of them all.
He knows what he's about.
Yeah.
But anyway, it doesn't seem like his brand of Virgin Galactic. I would expect it to be the most phallic shaped. But regardless, not sticking to that line of thought, I want to get into the section which I coincidentally named the big one in my notes. So ignore this. But regardless, February 4th, 1961. And may I remind you, the day that the Vostok 1 with the Yuri Gagarin launch was April 12th, I believe. April 12th. So we're getting a bit closer to the date that this actually happened. So February 4th, 1961, the USSR released a press statement or announcement, basically, and they said they had launched a 7-ton Sputnik rocket. And that was it. Nothing else they said about it. And this was perhaps one of the most secretive things or mysterious messages they put out, because at that time, 7 tons, I believe, was by far the biggest rocket that had been launched to date. And it corresponds at a good time to launch an astronaut, a cosmonaut. You'd think this would be a natural follow-up on what happened in October, September of the prior year. Adding to this, and Han, you were alluding to this earlier, an amateur radio enthusiast had picked up a recording of heartbeats and moans from a frequency known to be used by the cosmonaut missions. They also heard some Russian Morse code, and basically it was theorized that this was the heart rates, the signatures of cosmonauts being launched into space, and then something went wrong. An Italian news media also reported that a very trusted source to them told them that there was a man on board his rocket, but it had failed, and that explains the secrecy.
So what was the Morse code? What did it say? Or was it just like, do we not know this?
Yeah, it's kind of, not all sources are the same about this because it's kind of like sketchy, but I believe it was some kind of like just some random mission decipherings and just random mission notes.
Yeah, it'd be much more interesting if it was just like, help, I'm dying, the rocket is exploding. Ah.
We'll get into that later.
That's the next message.
Yuri Gagarin. Yeah, well, I will say there was a message like that. There's a very eerie recording on YouTube. That happened post Gagarin, but I am also going to mention it because it is notable on its own accord. However, this was pre-Gagarin, where this random recording of heartbeats and moans was recorded and was considered by many experts to be a cosmonaut or somebody launched in space. There was, however, to play devil's advocate, there was some pushback from some scientists saying that you couldn't pick up heartbeats and moans via radio connections that way, and also that it doesn't make sense to transmit those over radio transmissions in the first place. But, potato, or I don't think that's the right saying, but, whatever.
It isn't. It definitely isn't, but we know what you mean.
Yeah, I got you there. I think that is a really good counterpoint. Like, why would you transmit that over radio? That does seem odd.
How else would they transmit it?
I don't know.
Yeah, I did think about this either. The source I was reading was like, yeah, this isn't true because it wouldn't transmit over radio, but maybe like, yeah, because I guess they only really had radio back then.
Didn't they? Well,
did they have other signals and stuff which they could? I'm assuming they had like tracking signals and stuff which could translate the stuff in like code.
Well, they definitely didn't have any Wi-Fi in space, so.
Yeah, huh. This is a good question. I honestly don't know.
That's a good point by you, huh? Because it's insane to think that this podcast is more high tech than these space missions. So.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And there is something to be said, like radio is notoriously easy to just accidentally find your way onto a certain frequency and hear something you shouldn't be.
Yeah. You can literally interesting sidetrack on radio, but I actually tuned into the radio with my guitar once.
Really?
Yeah, because it's a big magnet. It's just yeah. So an electric guitar has magnets that amplify the sound. So you could actually pick up radio or like weird frequencies with the magnets on your guitar, I think.
Interesting. Yeah. Radio's free.
Yeah, so maybe someone was just playing some Led Zeppelin in Russia, oh wait, that's before that shit. Just playing some rock and roll on his guitar, some Johnny B. Good, and then he picks up this moaning in his heartbeat.
Well, there was the Russians apparently were really concerned about the stuff they were transmitting over the radio because these signals were just open for anybody to catch into. So there was this one spacecraft, which with a dummy, I think it might have been the one we were talking about earlier, which was going to pass over some radio areas, which they were sure the Americans were going to be listening into it. So they're like, we're going to test out our radio system, see what works. But what can we test out that doesn't make us seem weak or not cool? So they were like, we could do music, but then they're like, wouldn't the Americans tuning in hear a voice from space singing? Wouldn't they think that there's some insane Russian up there? So they're like, we can't do music. And they're like, we could do maybe some Morse code or something. They're like, we can't do that either. We need to do something better than that. So eventually they decided upon playing a record of opera of a choir of, I think, 30 voices, because they're like, even if the Americans listen in, there's not going to be 30 people in a spacecraft singing at once. This is like official logic, as well as a narrated recipe to make some kind of Russian dish, and that alterated throughout the entire space flight.
I mean, how funny would it have been if they did that they just tricked the Americans into thinking there was a Russian singer in space? Just the Russian troll guy singer, he's like,
Or what if they're like, holy shit, the Russians have 30 people in space?
That was their logic. The Americans couldn't be that stupid.
They sent the whole Russian orchestra in space, the madmen.
Well, the Cold War, what a crazy time.
Everything was possible.
It's just when you have two governments throwing money at any problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys send a dude into space, but we just send a marching band into space. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you gonna do?
Wow. Man, okay, yeah. This one really does. I don't know what to think about it. That's.
So I'm gonna approach the Yuri Gagarin example now, but I'm going to introduce the Yuri Gagarin case first, and then backtrack to a different example. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because the example I'm going to backtrack to happened allegedly between April 7th and 8th. And Gagarin happened April 12th. Okay, so stick with me. So April 12th, Yuri Gagarin goes up into Vostok 1, does a few quick orbits, and then comes back down to Earth. And everybody's like, amazing, the second coming of Christ, I guess. But the full world exploded. It was a major step for humanity. He became an instant celebrity, etc., etc. But there were some weird inconsistencies about the Gagarin scenario. First off, how long do you think Gagarin was known as the cosmonaut who was going up for this mission? How long do you think he knew?
The day before. So, I'm sure they didn't let him know for a long time.
Did they just have a big lottery and just roll a ball out? Not number 53. That's you, Yuri. Up you go.
I will say the Russian cosmonaut program started in 1960 with 18 or so cosmonauts, and they had been training since then for missions like this.
Okay. So I'm assuming they didn't necessarily know it would be them, but they could all assume.
But what was common practice, for obvious reasons, is that there'd be assigned like a main pilot to go up, and then he would be in charge of like figuring out how the systems work, get special attention, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So the point I'm trying to make is he only knew 3 to 4 days before the mission that he was going to be the main pilot on this.
Okay, yeah, that wasn't too far off.
Yes, but that seems really sketchy to me.
Yeah.
If you're going to be first person to space, you only tell him 3 to 4 days beforehand. And this was announced on a Saturday.
Yeah, you want it to be a surprise for him.
Yeah, maybe it was his birthday.
It's a Saturday, man. And also, like, Saturday's not a good media day. You'd think it'd be a bit earlier. Also, maybe in the
Soviet Union it is. I don't know.
Also, what do you think of Yuri Gagarin himself?
I know he's like a pretty, just based off of like, I don't know too much about him, but like he's kind of like a quiet guy. Obviously incredibly intelligent. Came from like a working class background. I can't remember if his family were farmers or like factory workers. I can't quite
believe
remember.
They were very working class. But
yes, yeah.
Why would you choose somebody with that kind of? So also, basically, what I'm trying to say is he was a novice pilot when he was chosen. He had no real major achievements, despite many other cosmonauts having altitude record achievements in the program. He didn't come from a great background. So in Russia, there is a big deal, or in the Soviet Union, there was a big deal about being of a good background. So you'd rather have the first cosmonaut being somebody who has a family name, who is recognizable. Basically, all Yuri Gagarin had going for him, to be blunt and not take anything away, he was good looking. You can't deny that.
Oh, he's very photogenic.
Exactly. His photos have aged extremely well for somebody from like the 1960s who just came back from space. And secondly, he was also a very loyal communist supporter. Mm-hmm. So he is a bit of a sketchy appointment, especially when I introduce somebody else in a few seconds.
I was just going to say, I think in terms of his background, it fits pretty well into at least maybe not. Or like just Soviet propaganda in general. He worked, so I'm just like looking at his background just to get more details. Like he worked on a collective farm, like so he's basically just a farm boy turned astronaut.
Cosmonaut. Look at me. No.
He does kind of sound like a perfect poster boy for communism, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Like
I'll make a counterpoint to this in a second because there was a better candidate. And that man allegedly went up into space earlier. Regardless, I also want to point out a few other weird things about the Cosmonaut, about the Vostok 1. So interestingly, there were some weird things. Like the Russians lied a lot about it. Apparently, they lied about him having a camera because you can't do that in space. They thought it'd be breaking spy laws. So apparently, he didn't have one. Apparently, he did. Nobody really knows. A lot of media was really confused because the picture we all associated with Gagarin, the one that got circulated, was him wearing like a Lindbergh jacket and a Lindbergh hat. Like, you know, the classic pilot thing.
Yeah.
And the Westerners were like, wait, he went into space wearing that? And it turned out that not to be like the real picture, allegedly, but it was like a weird choice of outfit to put him in for uneducated people. I know this is a very minor point, but regardless. And then lastly, the most sketchiest kind of thing was kind of how he answered a few of the questions about coming back. So the Russians did lie also, and this is confirmed about how he got back to Earth. So apparently they said, he landed the spacecraft. But the Russians did not develop the technology to land spacecraft until 1964. So every pilot until then had to eject themselves out of it. So he had to lie about that and be like, no, I did not land this thing. I parachuted from like 10,000 feet up.
Well, I mean, landing is kind of a broad concept here, right?
I guess so. Regardless, all I'm saying is there were some weird things about this flight. One of the weirder things, and I read this somewhere, maybe it's not as great, when this happened, Khrushchev was actually on vacation and was taken kind of surprised when this happened and had to be told by phone and had to be rushed back in order to do the final ceremony kind of thing. So yeah, it seemed a lot more quicker. And the reason for that is on April 7th or 8th, the dates are kind of blurry, allegedly another man got shot into space. His name was Vladimir Ilyushin. He was actually the son of a famous and a really famous Soviet aircraft designer. He had a really great family name in that sense. I think his father actually got awarded the Heart of the Soviet Union 3 times. He himself had also been awarded it. Ilyushin was a really noted test pilot. He had set several altitude distances, so being like the furthest up that you could have been. He was the first person to go up to certain heights several times. He was extremely experienced, and he got poached into the Cosmonaut program and was specifically trained for this stuff because the Russians identified him as somewhat of an ideal person to do this. He came from a perfect background, really great social standing, really experienced in this stuff. What more could you want? But Yuri Gagarin was the first one? I don't know. Just seems to me that there were better candidates than him.
Do we have some history on what happened to the guy? Are there any?
That's a good point.
If he suddenly had a very unfortunate swimming accident or something just around that time, that'd be interesting. But if he just went to live on a farm or something, that'd be less plausible.
It's interesting you mentioned that. So it's a really weird situation because the Russians definitely lied about something here.
Mm-hmm.
So allegedly a rocket went up April 7th. And this is what allegedly happened on the rocket's journey with Ilyushin in it. So he went into space, he did a few orbits of Earth, but the way his systems were set up, he had to come down either on the first orbit or the 17th orbit of Earth. Otherwise, he wouldn't land in continental Russia. So unlike the Americans, the Russians couldn't land their stuff into the ocean because they couldn't really trust people. So they had to land them over continental Russia. So the issue was, there was an issue with the craft. Something broke. I think one of the boosters or something, they have these kind of problems. And he came down on the third orbit instead. Guess where he landed?
Montana.
Ooh, I think I've heard of this one before. Was it China?
It was China. Allegedly, he crashed down in mainland China. Surprisingly, he actually didn't eject either because that broke. But he literally survived to crash down. He was heavily injured. There were some news reports by others that said he had heavy psychological damage as well, because apparently he was stuck up, kind of trapped for quite a bit of time and then crashing down. And what happened is that he was put into a Chinese hospital, and the Chinese, who were not in the greatest relation to the Russians, were like, what the hell is this? What is this? Some random guy who fell from space? And the Russians also were like, how do we respond to this? We can't say that was a cosmonaut from space because that would be a failed program. The guy survived. We have to get him back somehow. So what ended up happening was he stayed in a Chinese hospital, and there are records of him being in a Chinese hospital for an entire year before he was mysteriously given back to Russia. So this kind of leads to a question. How did he get into a Chinese hospital if he wasn't somehow ejected there? Because no Russian would randomly go to a Chinese hospital given the relations between the two nations. And this also kind of explains why Gagarin was rushed into the position to take the April 12th flight. Because let's say this flight did happen and it failed, if word came out, why not overshadow it with a successful Gagarin flight? So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, they were gambling though, because they could have just blown up 2 people.
It could have happened. But I mean, it seems like a great scenario. And to your final point, Han, the Russians actually said that he couldn't have gone up into space because apparently he got into a car accident the month before.
In China.
Yeah, and then the Russians were like, okay, that sounds stupid. We'll make up a different story. So then they changed narrative. He got into a car accident in 1958, but he was in a coma until 1961.
In China.
Is what they claimed. I don't know. They just said he was in a coma. Which also didn't make sense because somebody found photos of him receiving awards in December 1960. So there's a lot of sketchy stuff about it. Basically, what I'm saying, he's the ideal candidate. There is a scenario where he went up to space. He actually isn't a dead cosmonaut. He survived it, but it got covered up and Gagarin got given the credits. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, this seems the most credible to me, just at face value. Because, yeah, especially if there's, evidence that he spent a year in a Chinese hospital at that time.
I mean, 1960s evidence, but, yeah.
Which is shaky at best. I mean, it's coming from China as well, which is also not the best source of information.
True. But, inevitably there is going to be some true reports or
Mhm.
records. It's not like everything's just a blatant lie. And it just makes you think, like, why would they lie about that? Like, it just seems like such an odd thing to fake.
Yeah.
And
He actually did survive though. Like I found this documentary or the clips of like him like in his 90s. Like he ran some kind of museum. He was kind of hushed up and away from everything. Never really saw the light of day again. But
I'm assuming he's
everything
dead
that
now,
happened
right?
around it fits it. Yeah, of course. But
Bummer.
yeah, did you know? I found out that Gorbachev is still alive.
Yeah, he is. He's
yeah,
kind of faded into
It's-
obscurity,
yeah.
which is...
Anyways,
still doing Pizza Hut ads.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
regardless, yeah. How I'm gonna kind of round off this segment here with the timeline and seeing how much are we kind of thinking that there could have been a scenario, most likely that a cosmonaut got sent up into space and became a phantom or dead cosmonaut, or I guess a lost cosmonaut in Illicit's case.
Yeah, I think like to pinpoint exactly when, I think is extremely difficult. But I do think that it did happen.
But and on the other hand, though, to play devil's advocate, if it's so hard to pinpoint exactly when, if none of the individual cases provide a compelling picture for you, isn't that evidence against this theory?
Yeah, that's that's also a
Well,
good point.
well, it doesn't really provide evidence against the whole theory. Just because there's plenty of cases that could have been it, doesn't mean that... I feel like that makes it more plausible. Actually, the more smoke there is, the more odds there's a fire. If there was just the one case where it's like, oh, they sent a rocket into space and they never said anything again, that'd be a lot less plausible. And oh, well, they did it a few times, and a few times it's kind of like some of them are even sketchier than the others. So, yeah.
That's a good point. I guess we're going to transition to the final segment, and this is just sketchy, obscure stuff that happened afterwards, which kind of support the Russians willing to do things like this. So I want to start off by really quickly mentioning 1963. The Russians, huge rumors from the Soviet Union that they were preparing a woman to be the first female cosmonaut into space. Allegedly, she got sent up in November 1963. However, no reports ever confirmed this, and nothing else got followed up, despite there being solid rumors that there was a female cosmonaut in training for this time to be launched up into space. Then it emerged, and I think you're confusing records here, Han. There was a recording of her in space, like a vocal recording that got picked up, I think, with an NSA server in Turkey somewhere, is what I read. But it's very scary because it's literally her in Russian. She's saying, oh, it's so hot, I see fire, it's burning up, and it kind of cuts out, where allegedly it was her feeling re-entry and burning up into space.
Oof. That'd be kind of eerie.
It's worth somewhat of a listen on YouTube. It's pretty scary stuff.
Just a nice thing to do before I go to sleep tonight, I think.
Yeah, perfect still thing to listen
Yeah,
to.
so I think this is a really compelling case. Just because the details are a bit more obscure, but I think the fact it's so much more obscured, despite this few strong piece of evidence, it kind of does point to the fact that something might have happened like this.
Yeah, like I think the nature of space flight in general also, and especially in its like earliest stages, like it's so absurdly expensive. There's so many factors, so many points of failure within like these systems of getting just anything into space, let alone a living being, and bringing it back down. Like, because in that vein, I wouldn't be surprised if there's even like a lost astronaut.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but the thing I was actually talking about when I mentioned a recording, it was actually a recording from Nixon. I think it was.
Ooh.
Which is Nixon, and I'm gonna have to fact check myself on this a bit. But I think there is either a manuscript of a speech that was prepared, or there is actually a recording of said speech by Nixon, which was to be used in the scenario where the first flight to the moon didn't go well. Actually, I think that is recorded.
Yes, I heard this.
Yeah, which is...
He recorded both versions,
Yeah.
and he wrote both versions
Exactly.
for release if it didn't succeed.
Yeah,
it's so eerie.
It's so eerie, because basically, yeah, these two men gave their lives to the greater progress of humanity. Yeah. 3 men. Yeah, they gave their lives for these.
Rip Michael Collins in your mind. Come on.
Oh, come on.
Always forgot.
Well, I mean, that just goes to show you better get out of the damn rocket if you ever do anything. Ever do anything cool? Well, just make sure you're in the damn picture.
I mean, talking about being in the damn picture, Gagarin seemed to leave some of the spotlight, right? And some of the theory behind that was simply because the Soviet Union was like, here's our prized asset. This man cannot be getting killed on any of our rickety Soyuz spacecraft being shot up at left, right, and center.
And then he died.
However, yes, we're getting to that, Han.
Yeah.
But before he died, I want to mention this case where in 1967, Gagarin was actually allowed to be the backup pilot to Vladimir Komarov, who was a close friend of Gagarin, to the Soyuz 1 mission. This was a mission which they worked on extensively. Eventually, Vladimir Komarov was shot up into space, and this mission, nothing went right on. So he got shot up, and the solar panels failed to deploy, so there was not enough electricity. He was basically freezing up there. Then I think the boosters failed to fire and orient themselves, and so he spent about 5 hours or so, or like a substantial amount of time just swinging around Earth. Then he had to manually try to adjust it so he could send himself back to Earth. He did manage to enter the atmosphere, but the parachute systems failed, and he completely died running into Earth at the speed of an asteroid, basically.
Didn't half die. He just completely died.
There is this gruesome picture of like a chunk, like a
I've seen
black
that
chunk,
picture.
which is basically what was left of his body. There's also a recorded transmission confirmed of his final words. It's very eerie to listen to as well. Should I quote it for you guys?
Yes.
So, first off, to give some context, Zarya is the nickname of Yuri Gagarin, who was also on mission control all the time. So he goes, Zarya, I cannot hear you. I can't read my writing. But yeah, no. Oh, no, that was just a footnote. Yeah, no. Zarya, I cannot hear you. I have lost complete control of the craft. All systems do not work properly. You destroyed the control. All of you, go die. Speak up for the sake of my life. And it cuts off. So he spent, in the true Russian fashion, he started yelling at the ground crew. But yeah, basically fell to his death. And this was officially, surprisingly, officially the first in-flight fatality in the history of spaceflight.
Yeah, no, I call bullshit on that. Being the first one.
Afterwards, Gagarin actually made some public statements which blamed like the mission controller and just the entire Soviet missions for being pretty, not good at sending astronauts into space. He was then banned from participating in any future space flights as well as flying in planes. That ban on planes was lifted in 1968. Hannah, do you want to take a guess at how Gagarin died?
Oh, I know how Gagarin died. Well, he stepped into a plane and he never stepped out of it.
Exactly. I think the first flight he took after that ban was lifted, that plane crashed under pretty suspicious circumstances. There are a lot of conspiracies floating around this death as well. Most commonly theorized is simply that he was becoming too vocal about the program, and he'd be quiet because it's extremely suspicious that himself being, I guess, considered probably one of the best pilots in the Soviet Union would die on his flight in a plane.
Well, I mean, it does happen, and I mean, there's a few questions that I can kind of connect to this. First of all, why would they announce the other guy's death if they've been hiding so much before? Why would this one actually come out?
It was, I think the recordings were like 100% captured. Like there was no doubt about the transmissions being captured on this. Like people literally heard the man dying in space upon re-entry. Right. And I think it was also 10 years later. So there was or 5 years later, and there were much better technology for keeping like eyes on what the Russians were doing for rockets around this time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Not enough plausible deniability.
There was also a corpse in a funeral.
Yeah,
And
well,
the Russians basically acknowledged that this man did die.
yeah, exactly. But they needn't have done that.
Maybe. I think this is a pretty open shut case, but yeah. This kind of rounds out all the points I had for this topic. And I guess I want to finish with giving you guys a good moment of reflection. What do you guys think of this conspiracy? How much do you believe it? Did this change your thoughts in any sense? Was there anything you were surprised to learn about?
So like something like this, well, yeah, like I definitely do believe it. It is so hard to truly confirm something like this because of how much secrecy is surrounding a program like this. I mean, it's the Soviet Union to begin with, which is just inherently this crazy level of secrecy. And then you're doing like their most expensive science project.
And it's also in the 60s.
It's just, yeah, it's really, really difficult to like truly confirm it. But given just the reputation of the Soviet Union, their history, and then the just immense difficulty of space flight in general and all the like safety concerns and how hard it is to not kill someone when going into space. Yeah, like I think it's true.
I do think it happened, and I mean there were like of the original cohort of like the 18 cosmonauts, some are suspiciously missing. I'm sure there was a scenario or two where they were testing something out, and I do think that the Gagarin, he seemed too thrown together too quickly to kind of make that case. Honestly, one of the most surprising things for me is the fact that Vladimir Ilyich actually allegedly survived his crash into China. But
that's pretty crazy.
That's just insane, especially if you look at what was left of the other guy. I mean,
yeah,
oof.
Exactly. That man got lucky, despite I guess he's probably psychological damages.
Well, yeah.
Before I turn to you, Han.
Yeah.
Before I turn to you, Han, I want to know your rating, Ryan. Did you waver at all from your 10, or are you going to maybe be a bit more rational headed? Maybe do a 9 or something where you're like, I can't narrow down a specific instance, but it's pretty credible.
I'm gonna throw in a second number that goes on top of me. Yeah. No, so in terms of whether or not I believe it, I think it's 10. But in terms of provability, a 5, firmly in the middle. Yes, because like it's just from how hard it is to actually prove something like this, and again, like I think. Well, maybe not like just as likely for there to be like a lost astronaut. I think it's still also like relatively likely that the Americans might have had something similar happen where they had to cover it up.
Fair enough.
And kind of similar to the whole, like the guy, like the one official death. And I know this is much later and also just so tragic. I mean, like something like the Challenger explosion, like you can't hide that. They were literally filming it on national television. And to think like that's the first time that deaths had happened for the American space program, I don't know about that. That seems suspect
just
to me.
It would be interesting to. Oh, sorry. I was just going to really quickly say, I think it'd be interesting to do like a Redux episode looking at the American space program instead. It'd be much more difficult, but it'd be interesting. Go ahead, Han.
Well, don't they have to disclose certain files after a while that were declassified files in the US? Because they did this for a lot of CIA stuff in the 60s that was definitely not okay. Thinking.
So technically that like it's Information Secrecy Act. I can't remember the exact word. While they have like actually followed, like complied with certain requests, there's certainly some like things that have been withheld. Like to go briefly to another conspiracy. So many presidents keep saying they're going to release all the information on the JFK investigation and all that, but then they don't. I mean, why is a
It'd be
whole nother
so
thing.
interesting if they did though.
But it's the fact that that there is some record or some history of like not releasing things that
Yeah.
they claim
And I
they
mean,
would.
you can't release what got lost, right?
Yeah. Apparently, the only reason we know about MK Ultra is because one filing cabinet didn't get destroyed. And that one filing cabinet was then subject to a Freedom of Information Act request. And because someone like noticed something odd about it, and so
Yeah, and then then one poor intern had a horrible day because he didn't put in the right cabinet.
Han, I want to ask you to come off the fence as well, or like give your final thoughts a bit on this topic. What do you think about it? Have you upgraded from an 8?
I think I'll give it a 9. I do think I'm not going to give it a 10 purely because even though I think it's very plausible, I think I'm going to combine the believability or provability score of Ryan just with the general score.
God damn it, Ryan! You're screwing up my game here.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's quite plausible that it happened, but it will never be fully proven, especially with Russia still being the way it is, and the fact that these records are probably long buried and burned as well, just like the US records. It's very plausible, but then again, I'm not discounting the possibility that it just all fell into place for the Russians. I mean, these kinds of things also happen. We just shot a bunch of dogs into space. Let's just try it with a guy, and he miraculously comes back.
I mean, I will say, one of their dogs, apparently they had gotten really good, and in like the early 1960s, they had managed to get one dog who went up and down 6 different times.
Oh my god.
So, that poor canine, but they could do it.
I hope they gave that dog a medal.
He probably died in the 7th time or something.
Oh my god.
They probably did give it
Didn't
a medal.
They give like a posthumous thing as well?
Yeah, like
I'm sure she appreciated it.
Hero of the Soviet Union.
I guess, final thought. Guys, if the Russian Soviet Union ever comes to you and was like, yo, you want to be a test pilot for this space thing we got going? Yes or no? Would you guys do it? I mean, it is space. It's free. It's a free ride. Fame will follow.
Absolutely.
This is like somebody, some shady guy pulling at your shirt, being like, "Hey, you want to ride in my loop-de-loop? It's free. It's definitely not been tampered with." Nah, but I'd say, of course, for the motherland, anything.
There we go. That's the correct answer. This is a man who's not ending up in Siberia, Ryan.
Oh, damn it. I'm going right to the gulag right
well, it's been great having you guys on. I really enjoyed this topic, and it's so fascinating to look up at these old Soviet programs. I've always been infatuated with the space race. I thought it was a very interesting time, and I'm sad we don't see innovations like that anymore, but that's a full different conspiracy in itself.
Well, now we have the corporate space race.
It's been great having you guys on. Well, I guess I'll see you guys around, and thanks for joining me on this episode. If you were listening, no, I'm going to do that. I've read somewhere you need to plug in the beginning of the episode so people actually like and subscribe it. But yeah,
you need to what?
You know, like the little plug I do of like, ooh, like and subscribe. Apparently, you did in the beginning, so people actually do it. But I'll do in the intro a little.
There's still have energy left.
Yeah. Regardless, if you guys want to say goodbye, I'm gonna say goodbye now. So yeah, thanks for joining me. See you later.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. I wish I could say goodbye in Russian, but I can't. Nazdrovya? Nazdrovya. Let's just go with that.
Das Vidanya
works too.
Yeah. Well, goodbye, everyone.